asked over 500,000 people what area of the body they suffer most with in terms of stiffness and lack of mobility. And do you know the most popular answer? It's the hips, by a long shot. Tight hips hold us back from so many things. Deeper squats, better posture, athletic ability, and staying injury-free, to name just a few. But considering there are arguably 17 muscles that contribute to the hip joint, how do you know which muscles are actually the culprit for your tight hips? So in this video, I'm going to share with you a quick diagnostic test that you can do at home to help you figure out if your hip flexors are the problem, as well as my 3 favorite hip flexor stretches to help you improve that all-important hip mobility. Here's the thing, tight hip flexors are incredibly common, and I've spoken about this in previous videos, but especially if you're someone who sits for a large portion of the day. This sitting shape keeps the hip flexors in a shortened position for hours on end, where they also aren't being used or engaged or strengthened. So over time, your hips simply adapt to this inactive, shortened position, and it becomes the norm for your body. It becomes your lack of flexibility, your lack of strength, your overall lack of hip mobility. So I want you to try this super simple test to see what shape your hip flexors are in. It's called the Thomas test. Step 1. Find yourself a sturdy surface that is slightly elevated, as you need your legs to be able to dangle without hitting the floor. A table is perfect, or maybe use the kitchen counter. Step 2. Sit yourself on the edge and then gently lie down flat before drawing your knees in towards your chest. Step 3. Move one leg away from your chest until the thigh becomes parallel to the table, like this. Step 4. Now allow the other leg to extend away from you, letting it dangle off the table whatever amount that it will. This is the leg that's being tested. So there are now 2 observations I want you to make. Observation number 1. Is the back of your thigh in contact with the table? Observation number 2, is your knee bent to around 80 degrees, or is it much straighter than that? Actually, there is a 3rd thing that you can observe as well, which helps you know if your TFL is tight, but it's a little bit more complex, so I'll come back to that in just a moment. The results. If the back of your thigh makes contact with the surface and the knee is bent to around 80-ish degrees, then congrats, your hip is actually in pretty good shape and you have a good range of motion. But there are 2 signs that your hip mobility needs a little bit of work. Number 1, if the back of your thigh doesn't make contact with the surface. Or number 2, if the back of the thigh does make contact, but the knee is way straighter than 80 degrees in order for you to achieve that. Before I circle back to that 3rd observation about the TFL, have you jumped up off of the couch to give this test a try yet? Let me know in the comments how your results turn out. So just before I share my 3 favorite hip flexor stretches, you may also want to make this observation number 3. Does your thigh roll outward away from your midline? Because if yes, that could be indicating tightness in the TFL, tensor fascia lata, a muscle that sits within your IT band. Let me know if you want me to cover this topic in a separate video. So we've done the test, we've observed our results, so now let's find a solution. Here are my 3 favorite hip flexor stretches, which in my experience are the most effective for improving flexibility. Number 1, come into a kneeling lunge where your hips are stacked directly above the knee. Tuck the tailbone and engage your bum muscles to flatten out the front of the hip. Think of pressing the hip slightly forward as you then reach your arm up and take a slight side bend towards the opposite side to which you are stretching. Hold for 30 seconds on each side. Number 2, sit on your bum with your feet hip distance apart and your hands just behind your shoulders. Lift your hips off of the floor and then take a small step back with one foot onto the ball of the foot. Tuck the tailbone under and think of pointing your knee away from you until you feel the stretch. Again, hold this for 30 seconds on each leg. And then number 3, Kneel in front of a sofa, a box, or a wall, placing one shin up behind you and the other foot forwards into a lunge position. Again, tuck that tailbone and think of pressing your hips slightly forwards. Lift the torso incrementally higher until you find a stretch. Again, 30 seconds on each side is perfect. So now you have these tools for solving your hip flexor tightness, but how are those hamstrings feeling? You should check out this video next if you'd like to learn a fitness industry secret that unlocks better hamstring flexibility in literally 30 seconds.